Okay, so we're just going to pick up from where we left. So what we had done in this case is that we have defined a data set, we have gone into our body, we have told it what our data set is, and once it does that it goes away and counts the data, and then it knows that there should be 5 elements. And it's going to create 5 data-bound elements, and it'll use whatever it's selected in the P first, and then it'll append other ones after that. So, and then for each one of those, it will apply a piece of text to it. So if we just have a look here, you can see that this has created 5 paragraphs with John in it. Instead of the word John in it, what we're trying to do now is pull back the data. And as I explained in the previous lesson, that we can do that by saying, instead of bringing back John, I want you to do an anonymous function called d, and I want you to return d. So what that will now do is it will bring the values of our array to each element. So the function d refers to the data that is bound to the element that we're dealing with in the loop. So every time it will do this loop 3 times for each piece of data. It will append, it will create a data bound element, and then in this, once we call function d, we're referring to that data that is bound to that element. So if we just go back to our PowerPoint, I need you to read through this and understand what's going on. Obviously we can concatenate within that command, so instead of just returning that, we can return, your number is space, and then concatenate d to the end of that string, and that will do the following. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to see how can we change the style based on the value d. So we want to change the color if d is below a certain number, for example. So the first thing you have to see is, well, do I know how I can change the color of something? So the quickest way is to just write an inline style on each of those elements. So that is done by using the style function, and you tell it what the property you want to affect and what the value is of that property. So generally when I'm doing this, I will build up to what I wanted to do. So in this case, I'm just testing, can I change the property value of red? Now see, what's very important here is that you understand what it has done is it has written an inline style. Now in general, we avoid inline styles. We prefer to use classes. But sometimes you want to use an inline style to overwrite one element of the class. You'll see that in a second. We go back to our code. Instead of the word red here, what we want to do is we want it to return red if d is something. So we can write a function of d, curly brackets. And what that now allows us to do inside here is we can write a conditional statement. So if d is less than 42, then I want you to do this, otherwise I want you to do that. So what do I want it to do? I want it to return into here red. Else I want you to return green. No. So if we look at that now, you can see that those that are under 42 are red. So there are different styles depending on the value of D. So it's hugely important to understand. If we go back to our PowerPoint then, we have used the style and then we have written a conditional statement to change the style. So now what we want to do is we want to draw divs instead of paragraphs. So let's just go back to our code, and you may see at the top of the code I have written a style. Again, I've written it in the head. Normally it would be an external style sheet, but for these examples I need to just keep it simple. So in this I've written a style for a div, and down here I'm going to get rid of all of this for a second. So we want it to go in and select all divs. If there are none there, we want it to append a div for each element in our array. So if we save that now and look at our browser, it looks blank, but there is 5 divs there. But the div doesn't have anything inside it. So what we want to do here is we want to use our class that applies a height, a width, a margin, a color. So we do that by using the attribute function, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail in a second, but we can just say attribute, because we don't want to write as inline style. What we want to do is we want it to say div class equals bar. So class equals bar is a property value pair. It's an attribute. Okay? So we just say what attribute do we want to write? We want to write class attribute. And we want the value to be bar. So now, if we save that and go back to our browser, you can see that the only thing that has been changed is the word class bar is in there. Now, bar has a height of 75 pixels. What we want to do is change that to whatever D is. And we can do that by writing an inline style to overwrite the class. So let's go back to PowerPoint and just look at these. So here's examples of attributes. If you want to change the source of an image, the attribute is source and the value is logo. Now what's important to understand is that there is also another function. When we want to add a class, we can just write .attribute class and the name of the class. But there is a built-in D3 function which is called classed. And it's a really useful way of adding classes because you can make a class true or make a class false, which means you can remove classes. So sometimes you may want a class on an object, on a rollover, but when you roll out of it, you want that class to be removed. Okay? We'll come back to that. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to see, can we go to the last stage of this? And what we're going to say is, I want the style to be written inside here, and the attribute, the property I want to change is height, and I want the value to be a function of D. And I'll just say return D. Now, if we just check if that works, I would imagine it won't. So it hasn't added style. There seems to be an error, but it's not coming back with an error. The error is that we have told it to make the height of our div 33. So it doesn't know what you mean by 33. It doesn't assume it's pixels. So what we have to do is we have to say, make the height D, but we want to concatenate the px to the end of it, so it makes it pixels. So if we see now in our browser, when we refresh, our bar chart has now got style height 33. And that style, whatever you have in that style, will always overwrite what that bar does. And that is proved by, if you look over here, the height in div class bar has a line through it, letting you know that something has been overwritten. And an inline style always wins the battle. So we start with an inline style, then down onto a class in an internal style sheet. Okay, so there's a hierarchy of what wins, and the order of style is really important. So we'll leave it at that. We have our first data visualization using a D3 library with data bound elements in the DOM. So hopefully you have a clear understanding of what's going on.